Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Talking Tim webinar. My name is Kevin Vita, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCoE. As a quick reminder, NOCoE offers a variety of resources to support the Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or TSMO, community. I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. All the attendees are in listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the chat box for identifying yourself and the agency you represent, as well as any additional comments or questions you have during today's presentations. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations, so we encourage you to ask any questions you have during the presentations in the chat pod as they come to your mind at any time. The questions will be read aloud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. I would also like to state that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and slide deck will be available on the NOCoE website within a few days. That's all I have at this time, and with that, I'll hand it off to our Master of Ceremonies for today, Jim Austrich.
Thank you, Kevin, and many thanks, as always, to the National Operations Center of Excellence. You guys do great work, and just for everybody's information, there's a lot of data, a lot of resources there about TIM and transportation systems management and operations. So take advantage of those resources. On behalf of the U.S. DOT Federal Highway Administration TIM Program Office, my colleagues Paul Jodoin and Joseph Tebo and myself, welcome to September's Talking Tim. We have a great lineup for you today, and let's move on here. Next slide. So our disclaimer, which is standard procedure for us, we simply share information about technologies and products that are out there that we think and others believe and are utilizing to enhance or support traffic incident management across the country. But as a federal agency, FHWA, we cannot endorse, just share. Next slide. So today's webinar, as I said, I'll go through the update very quickly, and then we have two distinguished speakers that are going to present one on smart lighting strategies for emergency response vehicles from Master Sergeant Thomas Brengel, Illinois State Police, and from Missouri, Mark Sommerhauser will be presenting on Missouri's Rural Automated Queue Warning System. Two technologies, if you will, that we're very much interested in sharing with you, but learning from you as well. And as Kevin stated, we'll have Q&A as well as listening session. Next slide. So our updates, and I think we have slides for each one of these, but this is what we'll be going over here in the next few seconds. Kevin, let's just move on, please. Next slide. On the responder line of duty desks, it saddens me to say that as of September 24th, we are up to 28 line of duty desks. You see the breakdown there to the right. We still have 3 months to go, ladies and gentlemen, and it's so important that we do everything we can to promote the national responder training, marketing and outreach about traffic incident management and the technologies that are out there, and certainly and very importantly to the motoring public about what we do responders do, public safety, transportation, public works, and towers do to keep them safe. That number 28 is 17 away from last year's high of 45. So let's try to do our part and come in under 45. Next slide. So the Wall of Fallen ceremony, recently our office received a request from the International Towing Museum to inviting us to go and make some remarks at the Towing Museum down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I'm happy to report that Colonel Matt Perry from the state of Tennessee and his deputy colonel are going to go and be there on Saturday, the 28th, and make remarks. Towers are an important piece of traffic incident management. And even though right now we're showing 15 law enforcement, as the high number right now for line of duty deaths, towers are not far behind with 7. So this is an important activity that Federal Highway is participating in. I don't know if anyone here is attending, but it's a big deal for us to participate and support our tow and recovery stakeholders. Next slide. CRSW, Crash Responder Safety Week. We cannot forget about CRSW coming up November 18th through the 22nd. Our theme that you see there below, our theme for 2024, Responder Ahead. Reduce your speed as you proceed. Very important that you utilize that theme, that slogan, if you will, on your marketing materials and everywhere you can. And between all of us collectively, we hope to, again, make an impact. And I have a gut feeling that our numbers are trending down, even though one too many line of duty deaths, that is. But like I said, with 3 months left, 17 away from the high of last year's high of 45, maybe we can beat that and come in not much higher than the 28 that we're at now. So please stay tuned. And if you're part of the all states planning calls, if you're interested in that, go to the NOCoE website and register, represent your state, be a part of your state's TIM team, if you will, and do everything you can to spread the word. Next slide. That has to do, well, what can you do? I didn't get into the list, but the all-state planning call, that 4th bullet there, coming up October 9th. And every one of these bullets here states, makes an important statement, if you will. I already received, which was wonderful, the proclamation for the first time ever for the District of Columbia. Yes, Washington, D.C. I received that yesterday, and any one of you here can exercise your influence for a governor's proclamation or a mayoral proclamation, and all the different activities that you can engage in with your community. And we'll talk more about that during our next all-state planning call, like I said, October 9th. And please register for the national kickoff webinar. Next slide. The self-assessment that my colleague Paul Jodoin has oversees and has for, oh my gosh, since 2003, I believe. You can see the facts right there. September 3rd through November 30th. Create and complete your self-assessment survey between those dates and participate. Paul's really built a great following here, and it's thanks to many of you who are engaged, and of course the contractor support that Paul has with Battelle has been important and continues to be important in anything and everything you can do to continue to make improvements for your TIM programs. So keep up the good work. Next slide. And today I mentioned two wonderful presenters, already introduced Master Sergeant Thomas Pringle, Brengle from Illinois State Police, who began his law enforcement career in 2006 and currently serves the Illinois State Police in their division of statewide 911. He has been integral to legislative changes impacting Illinois traffic laws, enhancing warning light systems on state police vehicles, and is now developing the department's officer worn body camera program. And in addition, Mark Sommerhauser has worked all 28 years of his career for the Missouri Department of Transportation, and the last 21 years as the ITS project manager at the Kansas City Scout Traffic Management Center. And Mark earned his civil engineering degree from the University of Missouri, Rolla, now known as Missouri S&T. So next slide. With that, I believe it's going to be Master Sergeant Brengle who goes up first. And don't forget, if you have any questions, to use the Q&A or chat pod and type in your questions. So with that, Master Sergeant.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're at. Thank you for the introduction, Jim. Happy to present again. It's get to talk on this twice in 2 weeks. We just wrapped up a workshop up here in Rosemont, Illinois, specific to smart lighting. I think we had about 50 attendees there, about 20 different demonstration vehicles, walk through some different presentations, and just excited to present on this topic. The background on this is interesting, but I'm going to try to keep it brief today. Just talk about smart lighting, how that ties into traffic incident management in its entirety, and as well as some of the new technologies that are out there. So a lot of what this presentation covers, you might see is specific to law enforcement or fire, but again, the tenets that we're going to talk about and the SMART acronym applies to every type of worker that's out there on the interstate or any type of route, whether it's police, fire, EMS, DOT, contractors, tow. All these concepts are applicable to everybody. So next slide, please. So like I alluded to, SMART lighting, it's actually an acronym. The real quick history of that is been working with the folks here at Federal Highway for the last couple of years on this. I presented a few years ago, and we've come together with an acronym enabled SMART, which stands for strategic or strategy, message, automatic, reduced intensity, and tiered levels. So let's go ahead and break those down and explain exactly what that means. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So when we start talking about equipping our vehicles or apparatus or squad cars, whatever we're taking out on the interstate or any route there, we want to develop a strategy for the lighting that we equip our vehicles with. There's a lot that goes into this part, and I think sometimes that gets overlooked, both from an administrative level and then from some of the different vendors or whoever you have build your cars or your vehicles. So obviously, to start with, the biggest thing is what your budget can afford and how you want to design the lighting schematics on your apparatus. Budget drives a lot of things. You don't always need to get the most bells and whistles and craziest lights out there. You can achieve safe lighting on your vehicle without having to break the bank. But it does require some time to sit down with whoever's building your cars or to think through what you want to do. We'll go into like a tiered approach and concept where you place the lights. But when you sit down, if you want to achieve a certain result or effect on your car, if you're going to use what I call a brain box system, you need to plan out with your vendors how you're going to wire the car, because maybe what your vision for isn't communicated. And then when it comes time to programming that car through software, maybe you can't do that. So sit down with some of those design experts and consider what you want to do and look through maybe some local agencies, and you might want to mimic what they do. We go through the concepts here and retrofitting technologies. What do you want to do in the short term versus the long term? So for some agencies, maybe they can implement some changes now by incorporating new vehicles and lighting onto new builds. If you're looking to retrofit existing equipment, sometimes that can be costly. How much can you do in terms of that? I know there's a fire agency up here that's looking to retrofit some of their fire apparatus that still has about another 5 to 10 years of life in it, but they want to update the lighting. So is that something they can do easily, or how are they going to accomplish that? When I talk about local partnerships, when we get into talking about the brain box lighting systems that are out there and the ability to synchronize your warning lighting flashes with other vehicles, think about your local agencies or partners that you have in the similar realm, whether it's DOT or police, EMS, tow agencies. It's kind of like the Wild West with lighting right now, where depending on what vendor you have, it's kind of a proprietary system that sometimes, one vendor's system can talk to themselves, but they can't talk to others. So if you're looking to utilize one of those systems that we'll talk a little more when it comes to lighting synchronization, you might need to talk to local agencies to see what system they have, and maybe that's something you can incorporate into your build. The size and the dimension of the vehicle, take that into consideration with where you're going to place lights, and we'll cover that more in the tiered concept. When you think about your strategy, think about your applicable laws. Each state, it's a little challenging. When you cross state lines, what a red light might mean for us in Illinois can mean something different when we cross into Wisconsin or Indiana. I always give the example, I work up north on the North Tri-State Tollway, and in Wisconsin, tow trucks are allowed to have amber and red lights, but when they come into Illinois, they're not allowed to have red lights. Red lights are restricted here for fire apparatus, police vehicles, ambulances. So consider your local laws, where you're going to be operating, what color lights you can use. And the last part was strategy. For those of you who aren't aware, the manufacturers over the last few years have made great strides in what they can provide to you. And in different lamp housings that you can buy, you can get them that either do a single color, 2 colors, or 3 colors. Some even have up to 4. Depending how your budget goes and what message you're going to try to communicate, consider purchasing lights that are able to do multi-colors. And we'll have a demonstration here in a minute to show more about what that means. Next slide, please. So the big part, especially when it comes to the TIM world and the SMART acronym, is message. What message are we sending with the lights that we use on our vehicles? Obviously, the color is going to help identify what type of vehicle we are, whether it's amber maybe for DOT or construction, red and blue for law enforcement. Again, that's kind of state specific, but we want to provide a meaningful message with the lights that we have. And that starts with what colors we use. When it gets into requesting safe passage or requesting people safely pass us, That message can also get communicated through different light sequencing and flash patterns. So typically, faster flashing lights are perceived by motorists as conveying a sense of urgency. So that's usually what you'll see if it's a emergency responder while they're in driving mode. There'll usually be a rapid flash in there. Once we get on scene, we want to calm the scene and slow our flash rates down. Typically, slower flashing lights are perceived to be more calm and provide a clearer message and allow us the ability to see into the scene, which we want motorists to be able to do. We don't want to blind them or confuse them with our lights. We want to provide a message that identifies that maybe we have a work zone or an emergency scene, and then we want them to obviously safely pass us. We want to identify the size of our scene. So if we have multiple vehicles on scene, how are we able to communicate the size of our scene and what we want the motorists to do? That's where synchronization of lighting patterns and sequences on multiple vehicles really comes into play. If you can picture the kind of like we have here at the backdrop screen, if there's those two trucks with the arrow boards, if we can synchronize the flashing pattern of the warning lights and the arrow boards on that truck, we produce a much brighter, bolder signal that motorists can identify further away, especially when it comes to those arrow boards. Maybe they're flashing together, they're closing multiple lanes, that arrow sequence is flashing at the same time. It's giving a much more clear message that we want the traffic to move right and move around our scene. Again, flash rates, talking about that, especially when you're using multiple colors. If you're able to do something called color blocking, where you're flashing the same color light across the vehicle at the same time, that avoids the light kind of washing out. So if you picture driving up to an emergency scene, maybe it's a police vehicle, if they have red and blue lights flashing and both the red and blue lights flash at the same time, when you're up very close to the car, you can easily distinguish a red and a blue light. But when you get further away, maybe a half a mile or a mile plus back, if that red and blue is flashing at the same time, they kind of wash together, and that message that's being sent can get a little confusing. Is that the colors, when they blend together, almost look kind of purplish or white, and that can be confusing to motorists. What's really up ahead? Is that a vehicle that's in motion? Are they stationary? Is it a police vehicle? Is it a broken down car? Is it a tow truck? So when we block colors off and flash them at the same time, further away, that produces a brighter, bolder signal, again, making the message that we're sending more clear. So the next couple slides here, if you go ahead and advance one, shows an example on this DOT vehicle here on the left, incorporating a couple of concepts that we've already talked about. So this also highlights the tiered approach. Again, we'll cover that in a few minutes. But if you have a large vehicle, use the real estate that's available to you where you place the lights. So here we have an example of a highlights up on the light bar area. That's kind of your primary light, and then lower level there. And they're flashing in what we call like an X pattern or an alternating pattern at a slower rate. So that's going to send a nice bold signal far away, especially using LED lights. Go ahead and use the next slide, please. This one shows the idea of color blocking. So I'm going to flash the two reds and then the two ambers in the same phase in an X pattern. So if you can imagine approaching that scene from, say, a mile away, the two red lights flashing at the same time, kind of split over a distance of that vehicle, is going to produce a nice bold signal. Same with the amber color. And it identifies, the profile of that vehicle, where it's at, that it's stationary. Next slide, please. Another option, we can talk and get really far into the weeds about flash patterns. This is just another way to show an alternating pattern, but the same phasing of the colors. So maybe the two top lights flash red and then the two bottom lights flash blue. Another way to depict here what color blocking is. There's a lot of ways to achieve this, just a couple examples. There is no standardization for most vehicles that are out on the road, unless it's fire apparatus. So if we can kind of start to incorporate some of these practices into how we upfit vehicles, we can kind of harmonize a little bit without necessarily needing to have rules that we have to follow. So go ahead to the next slide. When we talk automatic in the smart concept in the TIM world, what we're trying to do is to eliminate the operator's input as much as possible. So especially with emergency vehicles, the driver already has enough tasks ongoing while they're driving to a scene or once they arrive at the scene. We don't really want to have to make them fiddle with switches and look down at a slide switch box to change flash patterns. If we can do that automatically, that not only helps standardize what we're putting out there as a message, but it eliminates them from having to do extra input. The brain box systems that I mentioned earlier, that's where these really come into play. So those are our systems. Every major lighting manufacturer out there has a version of this now. It connects into the OBD port on your vehicle, and it'll read different triggers or events from your car. So for example, it'll read when the vehicle goes into park. And you can set a computer-based program into that brain box and say, when the car goes into park, I want these certain lights to turn off, or I want these certain lights to now go into this flash pattern. Same as when the car's in drive. When it's in drive, I want it to do this flash pattern and flash these lights. That really helps us automate as much as possible. And you can also create situationally dependent events. Say on police vehicles, for example, if I open the driver's side door, if that vehicle has a light bar, that corner module of the light bar I can turn off or maybe dim so that officer isn't blinded by that LED light at eye level when they get out. Really, your creativity is infinite in these brain box systems, what you want to do with them. I know for law enforcement, we have it when we go in a park. We turn off all the white flashing lights to the front. We turn off the siren. There's a lot of neat things that you can do with these and the triggers that you can read from the car. I highlight turning off white lights. That's something that's key, that's been preached in the TIM world for a long time. White lights and lights similar on that spectrum like blue lights, but white light in particular is not only very blinding to motorists, but it creates quite a discomfort glare. And I think we've all experienced that when we're driving and we see white flashing lights at an emergency scene. It's really no different than if I was sitting here in the office and the light overhead started flickering. That white light, it would be very distracting and a nuisance and annoying. That's similar when we're at an emergency scene. That's why we always say to turn off our white flashing lights as much as possible. I understand that there's some laws that might require that on certain types of vehicles when they're in park in different states, but we want to try to manage that and automate the turning off of those white lights as much as possible. Next slide, please. Reduce intensity is part of the SMART acronym with R. So the idea here is we want to calm the scene as much as possible. This goes back into automation. So when we're in drive, really the sky's the limit, especially for emergency vehicles. We're requesting right of way, so we have rapid flashing patterns with white lights incorporated, which, you know, again, requesting right of way, showing we're an emergency vehicle. But once we get on scene, we want to calm the scene. That includes everyone that's on the scene. So whether it's a DOT vehicle with only amber lights or maybe a tow truck with amber or red lights, if we can calm the flash patterns and slow them down from, say, 180, 300 flashes per minute to maybe 60 or 75 flashes per minute, that's going to produce a signal to motorists that is easier to track with their eyes as they're in motion approaching our scene. And it's not going to be overwhelming to them, especially at night. When I say night versus day, so at night, if we can reduce the intensity and output of our lights, meaning dimming them. Yeah, I know that sounds a little weird, and some of you are probably reluctant to hear that, but there's a lot of research and science that's occurred in the last few years that really support the new tenet of reducing the brightness at night. I think we can all think of a time or two where we've approached a scene, especially when atmospheric conditions are not great, like there's rain or there's snow, and we're coming up to an emergency scene. there's multiple vehicles on scene maybe, and those LED lights are extremely bright and they're overwhelming, and it really limits our ability to see into the scene. The glare is harsh on our eyes. Sometimes we kind of have to shield our eyes as we go past. Now picture a scene where you're approaching and those lights are now at a much slower flash pattern. The patterns on each car are synchronized from each other. Maybe now I'm able to see and identify that those vehicles are stopped and where they're parked. As the approaching motorist, I can now better see into the scene, so I can see emergency responders standing there. They're not getting washed out from the bright lights. So if we reduce that intensity, that aids us. Just because our light intensity has been reduced doesn't mean that we're still not producing a visual signal identifying that it's an emergency scene. I kind of say when we did some work on our cars and our cars are in park, especially at night, the lighting on them might not be as fast and rapid, and some of the people that were looking at them were rather underwhelmed at the sequencing that we chose. But that's the desired effect, is we don't want to produce visual chaos when we're in park at night. There are flash patterns out there by each manufacturer. Some are called steady on, some are called steady flash. If you're from California, you're probably familiar with steady on, where emergency vehicles out there, typically to the front, will have a solid red light illuminated to the front, especially when they're in park. And I'm sure if you've ever traveled through California or seen that, that vehicle is really easy to track visually if you're another motorist. So if we can incorporate elements in our light bars or on our car of one or two lights that remain in a steady on position, or a steady flash where the light is on for 3 or 4 seconds and just flickers periodically, that again helps achieve the idea of reducing intensity and not overwhelming people when they come through our scene. So the next slide, please, is going to talk about the tiered approach. So this can mean a couple different things. We talk about what your vehicle real estate is. So you see that the backdrop picture, there's a nice big Indiana Hoosier Helper vehicle there. That's a big vehicle, especially to the back. So if we can use that available real estate and create 3 tiers of lights, levels of lights, that'll really help illuminate and identify that vehicle from vehicles approaching to the back. You want to use that real estate as much as possible. You want to use lights that are conducive to the vehicle size. So if I have a big snowplow truck, or if I have a truck like this that's pictured up here, I want to use lights that are appropriate for the size of that vehicle. I don't want to use a little light that would normally be like a secondary light on my vehicle. Something that's big and produces a nice big signal is helpful. With LED lights, you really have to consider what your off-axis warning is. You know, back in the day when we had halogen lights that rotated, they really help provide 360 degrees of coverage. LED lights really only focus light beam at 180 degrees and less, because they're surface mounts. So if you're going to be especially engaged in activities of clearing intersections or blocking roads, parking perpendicular, remember to include lights on the side of those vehicles, again, high, middle, and low. And as well as considering considerations for when you have open compartments. A lot of squad cars now are SUVs, and when we open the rear hatch, that hatch obstructs the light bar, and we reduce almost all of our rear warning power. So maybe putting lights really low on the bumper and in the hatch lip when it opens still provides us with some lighting to the rear or whatever compartment where it is that we're opening. So go to the next slide, please. So this picture shows the tier concept, or 3 levels. So the red arrow, that's kind of your primary light, whether you've got a fully marked vehicle like the one on the left where you can mount a light bar, or maybe you have all interior lighting like the one on the right. You start as high up as possible. That's your primary warning light. It should be probably the biggest light that you have. And then when you work down from the top of the vehicle, you can add accent or secondary lighting. Those are what you see in yellow there, the tier 2 and 3. So you have top, middle, and low. And if you can see, these cars are what we call a steady burn pattern right now, where they're all on. It's really good for photos. But going back to the smart lighting concept with synchronizing, if both of those cars flashed the red lights at the same time and then the blue lights, and they're parked next to each other. It's going to produce a nice visual signal from a distance. It's not confusing. Even if it's just the one car, if all red lights blink at once or all blue lights blink at once in an alternating phase, you have a good contrasting color pop there that immediately distinguishes that as an emergency responder vehicle, and using that tiered approach. So next slide, please. Another couple examples here. So you got color contrasting. If you have the ability to color contrast, again, it goes back to strategy and what message you're saying. If I flash all red and blue in alternating phases, that color contrast really helps identify what the vehicle is that I have. Here you'll see the example top, middle, low, and in a park mode where it's a slow alternating pattern. Next slide. Similar concept here, just placement of the lights. And this is one to show if you have light heads that do multiple colors, like in the middle, flash the red and the blue still in the same sequence as the other lights on the car. Again, there's no hard and fast rule with this, but if you start to test it, we did some field testing with this on our cars, working out on the big slab. If we were able to identify ourselves better on the interstate to grab attention of motorists, we found that the color blocking concept really gave us a good visual indicator from a few miles back for drivers to start obeying the move over law. So something to consider there when you're upfitting your cars. Next slide. So as we wrap up here, we covered what SMART meant. There's some tenets that are really play a big part in this. So advance the slide, please. Try one more click there. There we go. So brighter is not always better. Faster is not always safer, and be strategic and use technology. So brighter isn't always better. We know that higher intensity flashing lights present more glare. This isn't the world according to Trooper Tom. There's, again, a lot of research that's available that supports this. Last week, we were really fortunate to have Dr. Bullo, I believe, if I said his name correctly, come in. He's done a tremendous amount of research on this that supports lowering the intensities of lights on automotive warning lights at night, slowing flash patterns. There's a lot of research that's gone on, and again, in the last couple of years that really support this tenet that brighter is not always better, especially when you're in park. Consider discomfort glare. So we know that blue and white produces a lot more discomfort to motorists than the colors of red and yellow. So when you're choosing what lights you're putting on, how you're flashing them, what rate, just be cognizant of that. We know that lower intensity lights, the brightness of them still provide visibility and identify us as a vehicle, but especially again at night, reduce how much that light, how much output there is. And so instead of flashing at 100% brightness, maybe you're flashing it at 40, 30% brightness. And you'll see that you're still making a visual image, but you're not blinding people coming up to your scene. Faster is not always safer. Again, faster flashing lights don't make the scene safer. Consider different modes, whether you're stationary or moving mode. What message are you sending? Slow the flash pattern down when you're in stationary mode. The idea here is to calm the scene and allow drivers to see into the scene. This isn't something specific to first responder vehicles. It also applies to DOT vehicles or tow truck vehicles. Again, when you're on the scene, slow the flashing rate. And lastly, be strategic, use the technology. So develop a plan, automate as much as possible using a brain box. Again, there's different versions of that out there. I don't want to get into vendor specific, but anything that reads signals off an OBD2 port will allow you to create a lot of different situational based events and make this implementing the SMART concept and these tenets a lot easier. And then again, use the real estate that's available on your vehicle. Bigger vehicles, spread the lights out as much as possible so you create a good tiered concept and determining on how you flash so that you produce a nice bold signal to the motorists that are coming up to your scene. Next slide should be the conclusion slide here. So I appreciate the opportunity to present to you. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. I'll be here for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Outstanding, Thomas, thank you. Outstanding presentation. Thank you for all you do, sir. This technology, I hope everyone, we have 176 folks that are still with us here. I just wanted to say this technology is a big deal. If you haven't seen it in your jurisdiction, how, as the Master Sergeant said, it has an incredible calming effect. And we're doing our part to spread the word, and you should too in your jurisdictions if you haven't already. As part of the Everyday Count 7 Next Gen TIM technologies for saving lives, this is one of the technologies that we are promoting and showing. So anyway, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A or chat pod, and I promise we'll get to all of them at some point, at the end. So without further ado, I want to hand it back over to Mark Sommerhauser from the state of Missouri, the ITS program project manager, who's going to talk to us about rural Q warning systems. So with that, Mark, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I appreciate that great first presentation from Thomas. That definitely hit home about the lighting systems. So my presentation this afternoon will be on MoDOT's rural Q warning system. This really is kind of a blast from the past. It's been around since 2016, but it still hits home today of doing whatever we can to try to limit accidents in the queue and those secondary accidents. Next, please, next slide. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the history. Back in 2010, the state of Missouri had obtained probe data along our major highway system across the entire state. So again, that includes major highways and interstates. If you don't know what probe data is, in general, it gives you an average speed every minute on, say, a 3-mile segment on the whole interstate and highway segment. Private entities, private companies have that data through freight vehicles, some GPS equipment. It's all anonymous data that they can sell and market for various reasons. It has a certain level of accuracy that we checked and verified before we started paying for that data, but we were able to get that data back in 2010. Around that same time, we had also deployed dynamic message signboards, the electronic signboards you see in major cities across our major interstate routes, say about every 20 to 25 miles. So we had some resources, and in all honesty, we wanted to do more with those resources. It's great to have a catchy safety message on one of your rural dynamic message signboards, but we wanted to do something more than just use them for safety messaging and reactive notifications once we were notified of an incident along our rural interstate system. Next slide, please. So the main key problem that we were dealing with, and I'm going to focus primarily on the interstate corridors, and of those, I'm going to really focus in on I-70. That's typical of our other major interstate corridors, I-44, even I-29, I-35 heading up towards Iowa. Any incident that caused a lane closure along those rural corridors quickly led to long vehicle queues, and we were seeing a lot of secondary accidents. We know distracted driving is an issue, and we want to make it safe for the first responders, but we also don't want to have multiple secondary accidents that require more first responders on the scene. So we were seeing that problem throughout the 2000s, especially as distracted driving was getting more and more evident on a day-to-day basis. So we really wanted to ask our question, what can our traffic management center do? Again, I'm out of the Kansas City Scout Traffic Management Center. We focus and prioritize the urban Kansas City area. We do that jointly with the Kansas Department of Transportation and really key in on that. But other duties as assigned also give us the responsibility to manage those connecting interstates. And again, this is going to be focused on the Missouri interstate system, where our Kansas City Scout Traffic Management Center has additional responsibilities to coordinate first responders, program those rural message boards, and things of that nature. And again, with those dynamic message signboards and that probe data, how can we turn this around to be more proactive versus just reactive along those incidents along especially that I-70 corridor? Next slide, please. So this is just an example. Our rural interstates in Missouri are divided 4-lane, so 2 lane in each direction with a guard cable down the middle. That's very typical. We are finally getting funding to make I-70 a 6-lane corridor. But again, that just started this year, and it's going to be probably a decade to get that in fruition between Kansas City and St. Louis. But this is what you see. And again, I'm going to come back to this scene later. I've given 1-hour presentations just on the incident clearance that's on this picture. It was done superbly, but even as well as it was managed, you see how long the queue is up along the interstate, back and over the hill, all the semi-trailers, the large number of freight vehicles that are involved. That is very typical of even small incidents, lane closure incidents along those rural interstate corridors. Next slide, please. So when we asked ourselves, can we give some critical information for specific important questions that motorists have using that probe data? And the 3 questions we wanted to answer for a motorist any day of the week driving across the state of Missouri on Interstate 70. Should I expect to encounter slow or stop traffic? Where exactly will you encounter slow and stop traffic? And how long of a delay should you expect due to that slow or stop traffic up ahead? And when we came up with our algorithm and our software, our probe data can give that information, and it can give that information automatically without any operator assistance from the traffic management center. And those questions really led the whole development of the project. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like when a message gets posted. Again, sorry, I know there's some blockage from the presentation, but in late 2016, we launched the rural queue warning system. And there's 2 phases on that message board. That first phase, stop traffic, past exit 49, 6 to 8 minute delay, that is automatically posted based on that probe data with no operator interference. The second phase is what the traffic management center operator adds as a second phase of additional information. And I will take this point, that first line of accident, past exit 49, left lane closed, realize this is from 2016. We are one of many states that transitioned away from using accident, and you'll see later on all our messaging is crash. Again, back in 2016, that's what it said in that first line instead of crash. But it's giving you that information that this is what you can expect up ahead. And again, this is combining first that automated probe data, programming of the message board, and then additional supplementary information from a traffic management center operator. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more, but you'll see that queue warning gets edited automatically as that queue gets severe. So this is saying now stopped traffic past exit 161, it's now blown up to a 60 to 70 minute delay. That's all based on that probe data that's coming in by the speed segments. And again, that's updating, showing the severity. So 50 miles in advance, 80 miles in advance, tractor trailers can know I should stop and take my rest break now. Maybe I'm going to divert to a different corridor because this is not a small incident. This is a major delay. And again, we have alternate routes. You can take I-80 through Iowa. If it's severe enough, you may want to do that and not be on I-70. Again, this gives you a way to gauge what that delay is, but it's also telling you that the incident may be at mile marker 145, but you're going to see stopped traffic by exit 161. That's how far that queue is building back. Next slide, please. So the detailed incident information, again, you'll see now it says crash, our more modern way of posting. Before exit 149, the right lane's closed. That's just giving additional information on the signboard. Next, please. And again, this is actually going back to that same incident scene. Again, this was working great. You'll see there's a loader. This happened near an exit point, and they knew that there was a maintenance building close by. 2 semis were in a severe accident. One had spilled cargo across the lane. All lanes were closed. They were able to get maintenance staff, a loader on scene, get 1 lane back open in less than 15 minutes. But you're still seeing that huge queue. Even as great as the response was in the coordination, just a few minutes of it are causing that huge queue. And again, we're trying to put really critical information on those message boards 20, 40, 60, 80 miles in advance to, again, try to break through to those distract drivers to make sure they understand, be aware there is stop traffic, significant queues up ahead, and be prepared. In this instance, we did not get a secondary accident, and that was great to not get one. But again, you see slightly damp conditions. It doesn't take much for someone to hit their brakes late, hydroplane, and cause another incident. Next slide, please. So again, this kept getting worse. As good as that response is, you see that the stop traffic is now causing 105 to 115 minute delay. Again, this is not uncommon in those corridors. Again, as quick as we're clearing the scene, it's still building a bigger and bigger queue. That's being calculated by that anonymous probe data, automatically updating the message boards with no operator input. Next slide, please. All lanes are reopened. You will notice this was done. Again, great scene. They had a tow on scene that drug that 1 semi up that gore point and up the off ramp. The loader cleared the rest of the gear, and the semi that's in the grass, they're going to leave it and pick it up later. They'll finish the recovery later. But you still have that residual queue. However great that response was, you want to make sure you're notifying traffic what they're going to encounter up ahead. Next slide, please. So now you get a message that the operator programs the crash before exit 149 was cleared at 10:09 a.m. Next slide, please. But there still is a residual queue. There's still stop traffic past exit 161. It's now gone down to a 15 to 25 minute delay. If you can see on the screen, you see the probe data is showing the speeds are coming up closer to the incident. You're seeing some greens replace the yellows and reds. Next slide, please. All right, so this is going to be an example number 2, an incident caused by just slight winter weather, just a half inch of snow and some ice on the road. Next slide, please. It's in a very poor place. It's in a valley, a low spot with a pretty steep downgrade and an upgrade up the hill. Next slide, please. Again, just 2 vehicles, slight injury accident, not much. But again, it caused a delay extremely quickly. Stop traffic past exit 161, 35 to 45 minute delay. Next slide, please. This is what we can get from the probe data. I did want to show this a little bit, and I don't want to overly complicate it, but the time is from left to right. So from the left to the right, you see from about 12 p.m. noon to about 6 p.m. in the evening was how long the incident was. And from the top to the bottom, that's the distance of the queue. So it's about a 20-mile queue. Again, a slight incident, but it's in winter weather, glazing on the road. And that's what we're getting, a 6-hour incident with a 20-mile queue. And it's just because this location was extremely difficult to get to. And with the winter weather, that just exacerbated everything. But we are able to look at this and do after action reviews on that probe data and see how it actually charts out on a graph. There's different graphical ways you can do that. Next slide, please. This example here is a bridge expansion joint that failed. So this isn't really an incident due to an accident. An expansion joint, a finger joint, failed on this truss bridge. This is something, again, same thing. It caused a backup. You see stop traffic past exit 103, a 60 to 70 minute delay. And then the second phase of the sign is a road work past exit 111. So that just tells you exit 111 to exit 103. That's an 8-mile queue that you're getting due to this emergency construction job. Next slide, please. And this is what that chart looked like. Not near as severe as that last one in the distance of the queue. It's only about a 7-mile distance queue, but it took a week to fix that expansion joint. So you're seeing from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 12 hours of the day. Again, red speeds are 10 miles per hour or less. Green is 70 miles an hour. The yellows are kind of in between at 35 miles per hour, but it is having a significant impact. Again, we did not get any secondary incidents during that week-long expansion joint. Again, we're not going to say our message boards were the only reason. We had public releases, there's ways, there's other things, but it's doing something a little bit more proactive with the message boards you already have to, again, prevent those secondary incidents. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a fourth example and just walk it through just one more time from the beginning. Again, it usually starts small. Stop traffic past exit 49. It's a 4 to 6 minute delay. You first see a small blip as the road starts turning yellow or red. Next slide, please. Then quickly you will see that grow. You'll be communicating. You'll see on your map the colors actually change on the mapping system in the Traffic Management Center and the public website. The probe data is really confirming that there's stopped traffic out there. Next slide, please. The Traffic Management Center can confirm the incident location if they have a camera in the area. This one, you can see a queue just kind of peeking over the hill. I know you can't see this very clear, but in the back of that queue, there's a school bus. And you think about what that means to people going 70 miles an hour down the road. A school bus is up ahead. And what happens if when that school bus is another 100 feet down the road over the crest of the hill and it's blind? Again, you never want a 70-mile-an-hour semi hitting the school bus at full speed. Next slide, please. The incident detail gets updated. Crash past exit 49, the left lane's closed. That's what the operator enters to just give a little more detailed information on that second phase of the board. Next slide, please. You see that again grow. It's now instead of 4 to 6 minutes, it's a 6 to 8 minute delay. Next slide, please. And this is what that incident really was. This was actually an extremely short incident. And I love this as an example, not because it's super severe. This was actually, they were returning the day after a severe incident to pull a semi out of the guard cable in the median. And it was over that crest of the hill that our camera just barely couldn't see. And the person forgot to call. And we didn't get that call, but it showed up in the probe data. It showed up in the warning. We reached out to them, verified, oh, this is the recovery from the incident you had the previous day. Sorry, we forgot to call you. But the probe data popped it up and we were able to respond. And again, no secondary incidents, only 1 hour, less than 1 hour, a 2-mile queue. but it just so happened to be in that perfect blind spot that we didn't get the call. If it wasn't for the probe data, we wouldn't have gotten it. Next slide, please. So this is a picture. Sorry, it's kind of fuzzy and zoomed in. That's what those signs are. They're not giant over the road signs. They're smaller ones. But again, stop traffic past exit 131, 6 to 8 minute delay. We're doing everything we can. Again, safety messages are all well and good, but when there's an incident and you're trying to reduce secondary accidents, we really want to put as good of information as possible on those rural dynamic message signboards. And again, it's really a passion of mine to, again, reduce secondary accidents and make those scenes safer for everybody. Next slide, please. As I wrap up, I just wanted to give a couple updates from the Missouri side about Everyday Count 7. There are some questions that were out there. The Haas alert system is something we've deployed a lot in the Kansas City area. The Missouri and Kansas Department of Transportation have done a lot with this. We have seen some traction that some local tow companies have paid for this out of their own dime to do whatever they can to make things safer for their motorists. So again, when their lights are active and on, that goes out to the World Wide Web, Waze, third-party data providers. And again, you see an example on the snippet that's not covered. Santa Fe Tow and a couple of operators have added that to their vehicles, again, to get that information out. Again, it's not going to have a huge market share, but Waze is getting better, more market share, more vehicles are getting access to this data. And again, it's good to see that it's not just DOT vehicles, but the tow companies are coming on board. The second bullet point, MoDOT is continuing the widespread use of our JAWS debris removal system. That's the retractable clamshell blade that's integrated within the push bumper of our emergency response vehicles. Again, it's getting used every day for everything from pallets to rugs to ladders, whatever we can do to keep our operators from having to get out of the vehicle for any kind of debris. Again, we wait for that JAWS vehicle to get that debris removed. And then the last thing is the drones. We're not the furthest ahead of all states, but we're getting more and more of it. We had some great media coverage for a first responder training held at the Missouri National Guard training track. So again, we're getting more and more deployments of drones, especially for accident reconstruction. And again, it's good to see us again making some movement there. Still had some ways to go, but I did want to mention those as some of those Everyday Count 7 initiatives that we want to keep seeing more widespread deployment across the country. So next slide, and that should kind of wrap up everything from my side.
Mark, kudos to you. Excellent presentation, sir. The Q detection, Q warning systems show a lot of promise. I know you said, the systems aren't new, they've been out there, but we're hoping that more states have the ability to adopt and sponsor and fund those types of programs, because the promise of saving lives is truly there, sir. And so kudos to you and the team, your team working on this, making a huge difference. And thanks for the update on Haas and debris removal and UAS too, because those are 3 areas that we are deep into as well. Similar thanks to Master Sergeant Thomas Bringle for his presentation. Again, another one that holds promise for saving lives. And we very much want to do that, right? I mean, everything we do is about saving lives, whether it's responders or motorists. And so those technologies do that. So next we're going to move, I believe the next slide, or actually here, listening session, but there's some questions that we have in the chat pod. I don't know if the ones that have uh, yeah, Vishali,
Jim,
I see that, but there's some other questions in the chat pod from earlier on. I don't
Yes,
want to
sir.
ignore the questions from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Kristen Hahn, in particular, asked several times about funding or grants for replacing emergency vehicles, trucks that have, from hit and runs. And I'm not sure I follow the question about commissar lights. I will plead the fifth there. I have no idea what commissar lights are. But first, let's go to the question about the funding for vehicle strikes, hit and runs, because that is something that my colleagues, Paul and Joe, we're very much interested in as well. We understand that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these vehicle strikes, hit and runs across the nation every year that don't result, fortunately, in a fatality of a responder or motorist. But the vehicle is put out of commission. And so let's see. I don't think our funding sources, I don't believe stick funds. I don't believe the aid demonstration funds. Does anybody want to take a crack at answering this question for Kristen? Joe, by chance, do you?
Well, Jim, I guess I answered the question with the question is, are we talking private industry, a towing and recovery unit, or are we talking a government, quasi-government agency? I think it's two different, right? Two different questions there.
The question was asked, any response vehicle, whether it be EMS, fire, law enforcement, when the vehicles are struck, are there creative funding mechanisms for replacement?
Well, once again, my immediate response is, first off, there are insurance matters, right, that are going to cover some, but then when the opposite side, what line of work are you in, right? Which responder discipline do you belong to? And then pursue it from there. Yeah, I mean, if it's private industry, that's a whole different ballgame.
But a big problem for sure, right, Joe?
For sure. Most, talk law enforcement, fire, EMS, most of the time, a reserve piece of equipment to replace one that's been struck and damaged isn't a big deal. But in many areas, it is a big deal, right? So, and it happens more and more. I can't say that it's happening more often. I think we're just able to become aware of it easier now through social media and other technologies. So we've become much more aware of the non-fatal and property damage strikes.
Yes, sir. What about commissar lights? Joe, are you familiar?
Never heard of them, Jim. Sorry. Sorry, I just haven't.
Kristen, I don't know if you can type.
No, we can't really do the Q&A type of conversations on here.
Oh, we can't? Okay.
No.
Thanks, Vishali. So let's see. Let's keep moving along here with Lee Lowe. What is the level of accuracy of probe speed data? Any conditions that change the level, or is it constant? Is it constant difference? Mark, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can answer that. So again, let's start with the data. Any incident data that we have since 2004, that's been out as a XML web service it's amazing the number of third-party providers that utilize that. I will say that a lot of times they will not get what's posted on the message board, so they're not going to get the raw data calculation of what the delay is time, but they get all the timestamps of the lanes being opened and closed. The reality is those things like Waze and Google are using their own algorithms. They have connectivity to our probe data or our raw data, that they are using that plus their own algorithms to publish their own approximate travel times. So again, that information is available. There has been a history for the last decade of there not being as much standardization, but I will say our web and XML that we release is pretty easy to understand for anybody that wants to use it. Again, the work zone data exchange is starting to get that a more normalized for work zones that have like a beginning and an end limit. So we're getting a little more standardization. But again, that's been available for well over a decade for other people to use. When you look at the probe data, you do have to understand what you're buying. Again, the segmentation that we bought back in the late 2000s, 2010 timeframe had about a 2 to 3 mile segmentation. There are some people, especially in more urban and congested areas, that will offer micro segmentation that can get that down to a mile or so. That's hard to get in the rural area of Missouri, and it really isn't needed since your exits are so far apart. I would say that you have to map it out and see what the probe data looks like. We can't do the same kind of messaging in an urban situation because that level of probe data isn't accurate enough. Again, this works in a rural situation where you have big time gaps. It goes from a 4 to 6 minute delay to a 10 to 20 minute. So it really is, it works great for the rural areas. I couldn't do the same algorithm in downtown Kansas City because the level of accuracy would be different and the exits are so close together. So again, it does have to be in the right situation, and that's why this presentation really does focus on the rural queue warning system, because that's where that accuracy is good enough. And we've never gotten complaints about the fact that, oh, you're saying it's 100 to 110 minute delay. They just want to gauge that so they can decide, are they going to take an alternate route, take a rest break, things like that. The level of accuracy meets the needs of what the motorist needs. Hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of the probe data and the XML feed.
Excellent. Mark, thanks for sharing your expertise there. What about drones? Are they legal in no-fly zones? I'm pretty sure they're not. But from what I understand from law enforcement agencies, that we have engaged with, that whether it's around an airport or like Washington, D.C., obviously, where there's, the almost the entire District of Columbia is a no-fly zone. You want to say anything in that regard, Mark?
It really is. You obviously have to be certified and go through all the proper training. So again, it's all based on that. It's getting more and more support for that training. So it's getting funding and training. So it's great to have a piece of equipment, but if you have no one to operate it, it doesn't do any good. So we're getting more traction that not only are you getting the equipment, but you're getting the certified people who can use it, and then it can be used out in the field. So that's the biggest thing I would say, is make sure the training, the people, the resources are available that have that proper certification to know the requirements, so you don't just buy something that sits in a box. Seeing it out there and expediting clearance times is a beautiful thing, but it takes the people who can make sure they follow the rules, keep up their certifications, and implement it. So again, it's not getting dust in a box. And again, we're seeing more and more of that support and traction. That's just a cautionary tale. And there's a lot of other people who are a lot more experienced about that all those requirements. But that's my only cautionary tale.
Yeah, and the FAA requires what's called a 107 certification license to fly drones. I believe both free flying and tethered, but it may just be the free flying UAVs, as they're called, unmanned aerial vehicles, known as drones, Kristen. So just adding to Mark's point regarding requirements. You can't just go out there and buy a drone and do whatever you want. So
Jim, I
yeah.
don't know if you saw, there were a couple of really interesting questions for Master Sergeant Thomas Sprengel, but he did answer them, and so you may not see it in your open set of questions.
Where are they, Vishali?
They're under the answered tab. I'm happy to read a couple of them for you. So just
Sure.
because I want to make sure everyone else also reads that. But one of the questions was on the 3-tier slide, whether roof mounted is generally the most, if roof mounted is generally the most visible and best lighting, why, dare I ask, why that marked or unmarked vehicle on the right-hand side has interior mounted lights as opposed to roof mounted. And then I think there was a question on, what is the overall sort of cost proposition when we go to vehicle lighting that's coordinated. So I don't know, Thomas, if you want to answer that initial question that you answered already on the chat.
Yeah, the difference between interior light bars versus exterior, I think it's really agency preference. There's no hard, fast rule with that. I do know some agencies up here choose more interior light bars. Being up in the Chicago area, they're less exposure to the harsh elements, so they don't degrade as quicker. They can get a few more years of life and out of them, where the lenses aren't getting oxidized or scraped. Or that's getting obscured by, ice and snow. And usually, not always, but sometimes the interior bars are a little less expensive than the exterior bars. So that would just be maybe from the hip idea why. Sometimes traffic units or units engaged more in like the traffic enforcement, they might prefer them to be a little more covert. And taking the light bar off the roof does that. But, with low profile light bars now, it's the difference of them being on the roof versus inside. There's not a dramatic difference there. The next question about cost, I don't recall seeing that one, but if you're going to choose one of those systems that we call a brain box, right, that plugs into the OBD port, or you can program all your lights through a software, you don't actually have to sync the lights together through a cable or drop them to ground or 12 volts to switch the pattern. If you're going to choose a brain box system, there is definitely a higher cost to that. It all depends, though, on what you choose with the vendor or the upfitter. That can be all over the board, right? If you're buying multiple vehicles, maybe you can get a reduced rate. So cost, that's really hard to give a good idea with that, but sometimes you can work around that if you trade things in or whatever. But hopefully that answers those two questions. Am I missing another one? I can't recall here.
No, I think the other question was whether these systems connect to connected vehicles or automated vehicles, CAVs. And I think you answered that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Not to my knowledge. The manufacturers, the lighting manufacturers might be working on that. I remember there was a question came up in the workshop last week about how autonomous vehicles read lighting signals given from emergency vehicles. That was also an interesting concept. We had a few manufacturers present, and they all kind of scratched their head and took some notes. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years you start to see some lighting technologies that we put on emergency vehicles interface somehow with autonomous vehicles. That's a great question, and probably still an emerging technology with that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Master Sergeant. We're going to move on now to our listening session. We have some poll questions that we need your responses. So we're based on cue detection and cue warning. Vishali or
Sure.
Kevin?
Happy to step in. Go back one slide, Kevin. Sorry, just to clarify so that everyone understands how and what these questions are in reference to. For that presentation that was made today, it is a great example of a cue warning system, which includes the detection. For Missouri, they're detecting the cues through multiple mechanisms, including vehicle probe data. And then for warning, they are doing a great job of warning travelers of cues through changeable message signs that are overhead, but potentially also through other mechanisms. So with that, we have a few polling questions. Go ahead, next slide. The first question is, does your transportation agency have a cue warning system that you employ? And then the second one will come to next. So that's your first question. You should be able to see it on your screen. Let me know if you are not able to.
We appreciate
Okay.
everyone's response.
Yes, so I think you can see that about 1 in 4 of the individuals that are participating today do have some sort of cue warning system. We recognize also that they are being used all over. And then the third question, which is, what data does the system use to detect cues? Looks like vehicle probe data by about half. Monitoring CCTV cameras is the most significantly frequently used method. And so we have one more polling question. If you want to go to the next slide, Kevin, we'll give it a minute to finish this question. And then if you have specific questions about cue warning systems or ideas or thoughts, feel free to add them in the webinar chat. All right, I'm going to close this poll and ask the last question. Let me go ahead and share the results here. So you could see about half of the participants that responded do have a cue warning system. We'll look through the names, and then in terms of the types of data used, the CCTV cameras were most frequently cited, followed by vehicle probe data, responder reporting, and other mechanisms. And the final poll question, let me go ahead and pull up, give me one moment, which is, do your cue warning systems have automation with regard to cue detection and with regard to the posting of the message sign? So let's go ahead and bring that up. There we go. Let's see. Kevin, I'm not sure. Let me try one more time. Relaunch poll. There we go. So this is part 2. How are road users warned about the upcoming cue? And then secondly, what part of the cue warning is automated? So, for example, today when Mark shared, they are using automated methods for detecting cues, and then they're using automated processes potentially for posting the cues on the message board. So does your queue detection system use automated or automated processes? So that is the second question. And we'll give it a minute for folks to respond. If you have any other questions with regard to queue detection and warning systems, or if you have any feedback or comments, feel free to add them in the webinar chat. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share results so that everyone can see that, for example, virtually all of the agencies that are using queue warning systems will post that on changeable message signs. About a half of them use portable changeable message signs or in-vehicle alerting systems like DriveWise or Haas Alert. And then in terms of automation, about half of the organizations have automated processes for detecting queues, and more than half have automated processes for posting the queues on message signs. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jim.
Okay, excellent, Shali, thank you. We have 4 minutes left, and let's see. Well, as I like to do, give my colleagues an opportunity to make any remarks. And I'll start with Mr. Jodoin, if you're still with us.
I am still with us, at least.
There you are.
Never know, you never know. No, thanks, Jim. Nothing to add. It was a good webinar. I love both of those topics. They're both near and dear to my heart when we're improving safety. So, but thanks, Jim. I'm all set.
Thank you, Paul. And Joe?
Yeah, there we go. My finger wouldn't work. Yeah, great presentations. Whatever we can do, and whenever we can do it to protect the queue and anticipate that, it helps clear the original event. There's no secondary event. You don't have to deplete your resources. It goes on and on and on. So yeah, great job in that and everything else that you all do out there, because we know traffic incident management saves lives every single day, and it's doing it while we sit right here. So thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Joe. And just as a reminder, feel free to reach out to Paul, Joe, or myself. Email us, give us a call. We're here to support you in this incredible endeavor that is traffic incident management. There's no question that the practices of Tim save lives and ensures that we all get to go home and see our families again every day. And so with that, I'd like to thank again our presenters, Mark Sommerhauser and Master Sergeant Thomas Brengel. And a big thank you, shout out to Kevin Vita with the National Operations Center of Excellence, and Vaishali Shah with AEM Corporation. Thank you. We'll see you next month, and stay safe out there.